Dr. Trevor Buffoni, welcome back to the Social Sunshine Podcast.
Yo, 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 welcome to the show. It's Dr. Buffoni and Brittany Crossan doing the podcast again.
Look what I have.
Oh, okay,
I
that's
have
my
Dr.
book.
Buffoni's latest book, y'all. Social Media Musical Theater.
I love the product placement.
I mean, I'm just going to go ahead and just put it out there right at the beginning. If you're not watching the video version, I am holding Trevor's latest book that he released. That is Social Media and Musical Theater, which I'm going to ask you about later. But we'll put that on hold because we're here to dive into this TikTok drama.
All the drama.
It's a lot going on in the TikTok world in recent weeks and months. And I think it's important to talk about this as professionals in the social media space, but also as creators. You and I have been creating on social media even before Fun Love Media even existed, which you're a big part of now. If you are new to the show, so Trevor works in my company, Fun Love Media, as a social media manager, but he's also been creating social for like many years. So I'm going to dive right into the TikTok talk. So what the hell is going on? Can you break it down? Can you give us like a timeline of what's happening? Is TikTok banned? Like, please fill us in.
Well, as of today, TikTok is not banned in the United States, at least. Of course, we know like India banned it years ago. But basically, the United States government and different state governments as well have been trying to ban TikTok. Of course, they never outright say in the legislature the word ban, but essentially passing laws that would effectively ban the platform. And so we saw this last year when the House, I think it was early 2023. I had to think about what year we were in. They tried to pass a House bill, and there was a lot of confusion, confusion about what TikTok actually is, and ultimately it didn't pass. This was not a popular piece of legislation, but things really escalated this year. So March 13th of 2024, the House passed HR 7521, the Protecting Americans from Foreign Adversary Controlled Applications Act. And that passed basically with no hearings, no expert witnesses, no real conversation. It was just pushed through very quickly in the House, and it passed relatively easily and unanimously, essentially. And then it stalled in the Senate. That would have required TikTok to essentially ByteDance, the parent company that owns TikTok, and also CapCut, which I know a lot of us use as well to edit. It would require ByteDance to divest from those or sell those essentially to an American company. And so it effectively would ban TikTok because TikTok has said time and time again ByteDance has said time and time again that they are not interested in selling. That sort of stalled in the Senate. But last week, everything just hit another gear. We had a necessary and essential foreign aid package that was going to get signed by the president. It was going to get pushed through Congress. And essentially, the House attached that same bill to the essential foreign aid package. The only difference was it gives ByteDance 9 months to sell and then a 3-month extension period if they're in the process of that negotiation. That bill was quickly passed 4 days later in the Senate. And then the next morning, on April 24th, we had Joe Biden sign that into law. So once that happened, lawsuits kick in. I can't say too much, but I do know different creators that are involved in some of these lawsuits. It's all private information. Have been different states. So Montana, for instance, last year was able to overturn one of these bans in the state of Montana, ruling that it was unconstitutional and violated people's First Amendment rights. That same lawyer is working with a group of content creators to fight this legislation. So TikTok isn't going away right now. It's just in a very interesting moment in TikTok history in the US. And we shall know more, I think, relatively soon. But it is very possible that a year from now, we will not have TikTok. I like to think that this will be overturned in the courts. I think there is a strong enough case, and it doesn't seem like TikTok itself and ByteDance is largely worried about that. I think they really feel like this is not going to hold up in the courts because of that First Amendment violation.
Okay, so give some perspective for the timeline. So we're recording this on April 29th. You're hearing this if you're listening to this episode or watching it when it comes out on May 6th, 2024. So this is all very, very, very fresh. We expedited our conversation together today so that we could get this out really soon, because I think it's important for everybody to just generally understand it. And I know it can sound confusing. Can you, I mean, we don't have to do a big lesson on this right now, Dr. Buffoni, but like, can you just let somebody understand what it means that they essentially attached this to something else that was passed? Like, for someone that has no clue what the hell that even means.
So essentially, the original version of this bill was a standalone bill, which makes it very easy for people to vote yes or vote no. When sometimes there are controversial bills, they will package them in with necessary bills that have to be passed by certain deadlines. And the reason that they're passing them is, so this would be like the budget, like the US government's budget, that has to be passed by a certain date, right? And so sometimes they will put things in with it just to make it go through quickly. Usually these aren't things that are controversial, right? And in this case, this foreign aid package for Ukraine, Israel, and other nations was going to get passed. It had to be passed. There was no question of it getting passed. And so this is just another thing that the government, in the Senate, the House, they can do. It sounds illegal, right? To people like those of us that don't necessarily work in government or law, it sounds very shady, right?
Yeah.
If something can't pass on its own, it shouldn't be allowed to be put into this bill that will 100% pass when it has no connection. I mean, the TikTok ban bill has no relationship to giving humanitarian aid to the Ukraine.
Yeah.
My 2 cents.
Right.
So that's essentially what's happening. I mean, it's well within the law. And also the thing that I think a lot of people aren't aware of is the president, when the president signs this into law, they cannot edit the bill. The president signs the entire bill or they veto the entire bill. It's also already been done. So say Trump wins the election this year, it cannot be changed when he enters office. Right. Like this is already in motion. The only way that TikTok will not be banned in the US is if it is overturned in the courts or ByteDance sells TikTok.
Okay. So to somebody who also a little bit more just kind of like breaking it down on this whole thing. So what have you just kind of heard? We don't know. We're just like reading articles and we're hearing things, right? But what have you heard as far as like selling? Like had like on the streets? Is it like, oh yeah, certainly Google's going to want to buy this, or are there rumors, or are there any talk of any of that?
Yeah, absolutely. There are people that 100% want to buy this, Americans that want to buy this and want to be a part of the gravy train of TikTok. The folks that have come forth are not necessarily people that I think people on TikTok want to see buy the app. And we've seen what happened with Twitter and Elon Musk's purchase of Twitter and just how it's really changed the culture of Twitter, especially in terms of marketing value, of growing small businesses on Twitter. It's all dramatically changed. And a lot of the changes that have happened have not been things that are creator first. And so I think there is a legitimate fear in that regard. I can't say that, I talked to Mark Cuban and he wants to, buy TikTok. I can't say anything like that. I don't know anything like that. The other side of the equation is, honestly, Mark Cuban, if you're listening to the Social Sunshine podcast, DM me, call me. I can connect you with some people at TikTok. Something tells me that Mark Cuban wouldn't need my connections. But regardless, TikTok or ByteDance has made it clear they do not want to sell. And I think this is also another example of the US centrism, right? People in the United States think the world revolves around the United States. And the reality is that the United States market of TikTok is less than 30% of TikTok globally. And I can't tell you exactly the data because I didn't write it down, but something like if the United States was to be lost as part of TikTok, it would essentially put it into at some point in 2022, I think it's like Q1, Q2, where their earnings are still at that extremely high multi-billion-dollar level.
Yeah.
They of course would take a hit if they lost the US market, but they have such a robust business throughout the world that they don't necessarily need it. And I also think there's a lot of fear that if we just start randomly claiming that countries are foreign adversaries and we're going to ban their platforms in our country, who's to say that, Canada, Mexico, wherever it is not going to start banning Meta or Google or these YouTube, right?
Yeah.
These things that very much are super nuanced. So it sort of I think sets a poor precedent. And I think the thing that a lot of people keep going back to is the story kind of keeps changing. The people that are pushing this law very much say that there's data security issues when there is relatively little proof that there are data security issues. And a lot of the things they talk about are things that we know that Meta has done. We know that has happened with other massive tech companies. And so I think there's a bit of a double standard being had. And then the other thing is, China, they call China a foreign adversary and they don't want China to have access to a news platform, a media platform. But China's not a foreign adversary when it comes to trading, when it comes to producing most of the goods we make, so on and so forth. So it's sort of, it very much feels like the US is not happy that this is my opinion, everyone, Dr. Buffoni, the US is not happy that people are getting information, getting news from this unregulated space compared to having news through the US media, right? And we know that all of our big US media folks are political donors. They're in bed with Washington, so on and so forth. So it's sort of, TikTok is doing something that a lot of platforms aren't doing. And I'll give one more example, then I'll stop talking. About a month ago, you might recall that Instagram had set a filter on everyone's page automatically where it limited the amount of political posts that people would receive. This was part of an app update. They never once told people they were doing it. And you had to literally manually go in and change the settings. So they're not shadow banning, but they are suppressing political content, which is what the US government is claiming China does. But we know, we have proof. We all have it on our phone. We saw it. I did it myself, that Instagram was doing this.
Right. Okay. So again, I want to break it down for anybody that's not familiar. So the break it down. The idea is that, or what they're claiming, the US government is claiming that it's a security risk and whatnot to even have TikTok exist in the hands of those of us in the United States, because they're going to find out some shit about some shit and they're going to do something about it, basically. Like, I mean, it's, that's the claim, right? They're trying to say it's like a security issue.
Well,
Yes.
yeah. Well, more, think about it like this. We know that in 2016, the presidential election, we know that Russia interfered via the interweb, right? In terms of propaganda, fake things happening, fake news, all of these different things happening on Facebook. Facebook was filled with misinformation.
Okay.
Right? That 100% happened. And so there's fear that China would do something like that.
Okay.
So China, it wouldn't necessarily be that we're on TikTok and we get, stuff about the Communist Party of China and that sort of thing. It would be that China wants, candidate A to win. So they are going to influence the TikTok algorithm that makes people sway in the favor of candidate A.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
It does. It's good. Thank you. I just want to make sure that I mean, you and I have talked about this and I have a better understanding, but I want to make sure everybody else listening does as well. Okay. So all right, moving forward. So as far as like what we're looking at in the coming months, you talked about how the timeline is that they have about 9 months basically that ByteDance could sell to an American company. That's kind of the rule that's in there, or not. Now, but also it could extend, right? Because you're saying like if there's lawsuits and whatnot, it may not be 9 months. Is that accurate? It could be longer.
Yes. So depending on what sort of injunctions are put in place because of the lawsuits, it very well could be extended beyond that 9-month or 12-month timeframe.
Okay. So we know it's at least 9 months. Okay. And so what, let's get more into, I mean, we covered the timeline pretty much, right?
I think so.
Got it covered. Okay. So here we are now. What can you tell me? Well, I have 2 questions. One is about your recent experience that you actually had meeting a lot of other TikTok creators when you were in Washington, D.C. I want to hear about that and just kind of like just the general feel and perspective that you got from them and how this kind of ban would affect all those people that you met. And then I'll move on to my next question.
Yeah. So in mid March, right before that March 13th, well, actually during that March 13th House vote, me and 49 other TikTok creators were flown out to DC. So TikTok flew us out to DC. They paid for travel and food, right? And transportation around DC, but we were not paid to be there. And we were never once told by TikTok what to say. Who to talk to, anything like that. We were just given opportunities to talk to the media and to speak with our representatives, both senators and congressfolk. And while I was there, I of course got to really forge some pretty strong connections with different creators across the country. And I use TikTok and in a bunch of different ways. I am a content creator. I have made money from TikTok. I also manage different clients TikTok, so I make money that way. I have books on TikTok. I've given workshops. But some of these people literally, they have a TikTok shop and they have 90% of their sales come through TikTok, right? Or people that literally almost all of their income comes from the Creativity Beta program. I can't think of the new name for that, but they essentially are regularly getting enough views and engagement to make money solely off of the platform. And so there are small businesses that rely on this. There are creators that rely on this. People like stay-at-home moms that essentially can't do another job as easily as they could become a creator, or people that are caring for sick parents, elderly parents, people with dementia, like so on and so forth. There are a lot of people that are relying on TikTok, and I got to spend a lot of time with them. And the stories are quite remarkable. Like my story is pretty basic, right? Compared to a lot of the stories that people had. But at the end of the day, it seems like our lawmakers and a lot of the media for that matter really don't understand what is happening on TikTok. They think that it is this really frivolous, silly place when actually there are people doing important work there. There's education happening, there is community building. There are people who are building their businesses, much like what you're doing, Brittany, on TikTok. And that's something that the US government doesn't seem to understand. And so the question is not, we should not be regulating social media. It's that we should not be targeting this one platform. We should instead be really looking at comprehensive social media regulation in a way that Europe does. So if Threads, for instance, is still not available in Europe because it doesn't meet the requirements that the European Union has set. So there are ways for the government to sort of regulate what can and can't happen on social media behind the scenes, of course, like with the actual way the platform is built. But that's not really a part of what's happening with this conversation. It's just a blanket ban on this thing that is really improving people's lives.
Right. Well, and I find it actually, or I found it when I did in 2023 watch some of the hearing and whatnot that was going on, and on this very thing last year. I honestly found it quite comical, some of the remarks from some of the members of our government, because they were either inaccurate or extremely vague or confusing. And so basically to me, it proved what you just said, that I don't think that any or very many of those humans have really used TikTok or even really talk to someone who can educate them better on it from all sides. That to me was almost like it was almost like kind of embarrassing when I saw some of the remarks. Now I know more than the average person. You know more than the average person. We work in this industry, and so I might have a little bit of a snob, approach to it. But still, I mean, somebody that just uses it daily, even a little bit, not professionally, would understand that these people don't know much about it. And so that is kind of the thing that's just blown my mind this whole time, is because I would just think that if nothing else, you would just get yourself educated somehow so that you could speak accurately and intelligently on the topic, even if it wasn't something else and not TikTok. Like, I don't know, but it's these realizations you have with when it comes to kind of government situations that, you know what I mean? So when there's one that like I understand, there may be all these things that go on in the government. I'm like, I don't know what's going on. I don't know exactly what they're doing, whatever. But this one I actually knew. So whenever I watched them, I was like, dude, do you know what TikTok is?
No, they don't. Or they would. I remember in that hearing because they actually had hearings
Yeah.
a year ago,
Hmm.
and they would offer examples of harmful things that have happened on social media, and they were never TikTok, right? It was all something that came from YouTube or Facebook, but it's a sort of not willingness to do the research or talk to people at the end
Right.
of the day, or this conflation with Shu, like the CEO of TikTok USA, who is a Singaporean, he is not Chinese, and Senator Tom Cotton, which is quite a name. We can talk about that another day, from Arkansas. When he was grilling, this was earlier this year, he was grilling Shu about being a communist, right? Are you Chinese? Are you part of the Chinese Communist Party? And he kept saying like, no, I literally like am not from China. I'm from Singapore, but it's a
Wrong country, yo.
wrong country. And so, you can say what you want, but the way that our leadership is acting just reeks of xenophobia and really just reiterating this idea that we are in a digital Cold War with China. And this app that everyone loves so much is just the thing that they are sort of using as collateral.
Right. Well, so let's do real quick a flip. Let's give the U.S. government a little bit of the benefit of the doubt, only by saying, like, what if something was accurate? So how, in your opinion, how does anybody even ever find out? Like, maybe we never do. Maybe that's going to be your answer. But like, so say this happens, we don't, a year from now, we don't get to have TikTok anymore here, and that's the way that it goes. Would we ever find out if there was legitimacy behind this, if there was something that maybe we really should have been all concerned about that they just didn't tell us? You know what I mean? Like, do you have any opinions on that?
Part of me wants to believe there is data and proof,
Yeah.
but at this point, they would have showed us something. They would have told us something. Everything they've said has been hypothetical. It's been extremely vague. So before that March 13th vote, so on March 13th of that morning, there was on March 12th, the day before, there was a briefing from I'm not even going to try some sort of committee that
Right.
had the intel, right? They were briefed about the national security threats. And that day, I was at a press conference, and Congressman Frost from Orlando, I think Orlando, but Florida at least, who is the first like Gen Z, congressman. He's like the youngest one. He's cool. But him and then the other folks that were there, they all said, "There's nothing that we learned today that changed our opinion." Right? Like none of this was something that was so credible. And I think this is the part that goes back to the courts. When you contest a law, when you go to the local courts, the state courts, the federal, all the way up to the Supreme Court, you have to show proof. You have to have evidence. It cannot be just, oh, it's a threat. It's a threat. Like you have to show this is the proof that this is a threat. And I think that's why a lot of people think this will not hold up in the court, because from what we can tell, there is not that proof. And some people will point to sort of data breaches and so on and so forth, because of course, there are examples of this pre 2020 really. And they are not things that are TikTok specific, right? There are things that very much are issues with many, many companies. And we just saw recently, was it AT&T that lost or gave out, half of their customers' social security numbers, right?
Yeah, I think so.
That's not going to make consumers feel good. And so it's not that, and I know AT&T is not a social media company, but it is tech. And I think there is more of a desire for us to really have laws and legislation that looks at these things across the board that would, of course, force TikTok to change and force TikTok to do the things in line with what the government wants them to do without just effectively banning it.
Right. Okay, so before we wrap up, let's move on to some practical advice, opinions, insight for TikTok creators, no matter why you're a TikTok creator, whether it's completely supporting your business, partially supporting your business, it's not supporting a business, but if this is important to you, to someone listening or watching, which I know there's plenty of people it is, what do you say to those people? Not yet if it actually happens, but in this time in between, as we await the decisions on what's going to happen with TikTok, what do you think that people should be doing?
Regardless of what happens with TikTok and any social media platform, if you are serious about growing your small business, serious about growing as a content creator, you really need to be trying to find ways to migrate people to other platforms. I know this is easier said than done, but at the end of the day, people need to be pushing people to Instagram, to newsletters, to their Substack, to Twitter, wherever else is a place that makes sense for your business. Right. Now and for the rest of time is the time to push people in that direction. I'll be very honest with you. If I did not rely on TikTok for part of my income, and really if I didn't have books on TikTok, I would care much less because I do have a larger following on Instagram. So at the end of the day, I'm not going from everything to nothing overnight if the worst happens. And so I think that's something really important for folks to do. You wouldn't want to do this beating people over the head, but like posting once a week to a story, including it as a call to action at the end of a video, so on and so forth. Or if you have fans that you know the people that are in your, what do you call it, Brittany? Your VIP fans?
Yes.
Yeah, your VIP fans that comment on every video, DM them or just comment and say, hey, follow me on Instagram. I'd love for you to follow me on Instagram. I'd love for us to connect on Facebook. And you never know. And you might not get all 1 million of your followers on TikTok to go with you to Instagram, but you want to be really intentional about sort of building a platform somewhere else. That's one thing.
Right. Okay. Yeah. And that's smart. I mean, that's smart anyway. And it's something that I talk about as well. And it's interesting because it was so trendy for a long time for like social media experts to tell people not to do that. Like specifically don't be on more than one platform. They'd be like, choose one and get good at it. And then maybe add a second. I was always like,
nope.
What? Now, I mean, granted, that's a whole other conversation on how to actually structure that. So that's for another time, but you're right. Like to have a presence somewhere else, even without this issue that we're having with TikTok is valuable, right? It's a whole other set of people. Like what if there's people that are like never even downloaded TikTok and they're over here on Instagram and they're like, wow, great. Here I found this cool person. Like you never know what you're going to find basically from one to the next.
Absolutely. And the other thing I would tell people is to not stop using don't stop using TikTok.
Okay, that was the next thing I was going to ask you.
Because even if, let's say, worst case scenario, like January 1, 2025, it goes away, you might post tomorrow and go viral. You might post on December 31st and go viral. And then it pushes people to your other place. It pushes people to your product. It pushes people to your newsletter, to your website. You never know when the next thing is going to hit. And so if you're already creating video content for other platforms like Reels or Instagram, YouTube Shorts, whatever it might be, put it on TikTok as well. Even if the worst case scenario happens, it could still be beneficial for your business or you as a content creator.
Right. And I think that there's probably already, and there will be some sort of a decline in creating on TikTok, at least right now while things are kind of up in the air. So I think take advantage of that. Maybe that's, you're one of the ones that didn't quit early, and you're one of the ones that stuck it out and showed up still for the audience that's there that wants to be there, so I think you really stand out even more if you're one of those people.
Oh, totally. And you have to think that the audience or the group of people on TikTok that are part of that 170 million Americans, very few of them are creating content like with any regularity or any strategy. So even if you have a dip where 20% of those people stop doing it, you're still going to have a lot of people watching content, and it just sort of helps you out.
Right. And then I guess we'll have to revisit this later to see what happens, to see how the saga ends of TikTok.
Absolutely.
But I appreciate you coming and sharing this with me here because, like I was saying, you and I talk about this stuff privately. We work together, we talk often. And so I feel very informed, but I wanted to make sure as many other people were as well. I do want to ask you about this book, though, before we go, because I too love musical theater and social media. And so I wanted to ask you, I know you have other books, but just because this is the latest and this is the one I've got right here, and the whole musical theater thing is so fun. I did start reading it, by the way, Trevor. I'm not a big book reader, but I started reading
Wow.
it, so it's a special.
The
Anyway,
honor.
tell us about this though. Just if you don't mind, a quick story on why you decided to do this book, Social Media and Musical Theater.
Social Media and Musical Theater came out last fall. It is a 25,000 word book, so it's quite short.
Love
And
it.
essentially, it looks at this phenomenon of, right, look at that, very short.
See?
It looks at this phenomenon of how social media has influenced the musical theater industry. And usually I'm talking about Broadway or big time musical theater like tours, your big stuff like Hamilton and the Heights, Wicked, Into the Woods, Phantom of the Opera, so on and so forth. And so
Yeah.
essentially I look at TikTok, Twitter, or X, I guess. No, it's Twitter for me, and YouTube, and different ways that creators have used those spaces to grow fan communities. I look at different ways that productions have marketed musicals on those platforms, and also how people or new shows or people, artists, excuse me, have used those platforms to actually create a community and also to create new content. And so this book, if you're interested in musical theater, this book is, and social media, this book is a really great intro. I like to think it's really great, but it is an intro, even if you hate it. And it very much speaks to why this TikTok ban could be detrimental to the theater industry, right? People are relying on it in ways that I think the government doesn't always realize. It is a billboard. TikTok is a billboard. TikTok is a marketing space that is helping people make money.
Right. It really is. And even if it unfortunately does, TikTok does unfortunately go away um, next year, I think that it's will we be okay? Yes, we'll be okay. It's fine. I mean, this is not, we don't, I don't want to be overly dramatic, but I also recognize that there will be a big time period of change, like you're saying, with just in ways that it's almost even hard to articulate. But I think that we'll go through a big shift when it comes to just the zeitgeist, or everything. It's
Oh
just
yeah.
going to have like a time period where it's going to be this weird kind of shift, and it'll be all right, but it's not what we prefer.
Well, just imagine this. Imagine overnight all of your streaming platforms went away. Netflix, Hulu, Apple TV went away. Like we would all survive, but it would very much dramatically change your day
Yeah.
to day. Or say like radio went away, or
Yeah, it's a big
there are
deal.
things. It very much influences our life, and it can sound trivial. And I know there's people out there that are like, we don't need Netflix, but it's culture. That's culture, and that gives us reasons to live and reasons to be happy and things to talk about with our friends and coworkers. And so it's not trivial. It's very much an important part of people's lives.
Yeah, it is. All right, Dr. B, remind everybody how they can find you. How can people order your book? I highly recommend this, and follow you.
So social media in musical theater, it's available anywhere books are sold, and it is a cheap book. It's not expensive. It's under $15, I want to say. And you can find me on any social media platform except for Pinterest. Sorry, Pinterest. at, at Dr. Buffone, Dr_B as in boy, OFFONE. I am the only one in the world. If you just search Dr. Buffone, I'm the one that's going to come up.
One and only Buffoni. All right. Thank you for being on the show, Trevor.
Thank you.